Welcome back to another episode of our podcast. Today, we have the pleasure of speaking with Mishita Jethi, a distinguished attorney admitted to practice in both New York and India. Currently a partner at Chugg and in New York, Ma'am has a wealth of experience in corporate and business immigration law. Mishita Ma'am holds an LLM from the prestigious University of Chicago Law School, where she focused on public law and commercial dispute resolution. With her extensive background and cross-border expertise, Ma'am has established herself as a leading professional in the field of immigration law. Join us as we explore her journey, gain insights into the world of business immigration, and learn from her experience of working in one of the most dynamic legal markets. Let's welcome Mishita Ma'am to the podcast. Hello and welcome, Ma'am, to Brief Encounters. It is wonderful having you here.
Hi, Ria. Thank you so much for having me. I'm very excited to talk to you and, go over some of my experiences in the last almost 15 years now since I graduated.
Wow. And I'm sure they're going to be extremely insightful to both me and the listeners. So let us begin. Now, this is a question that we ask to all our guests. Was pursuing a legal career always part of your plan, or did this interest in the field evolve over time? What was the specific experiences or influences that helped shape your decision to follow this path?
Sure. So I think for me, it was something that sort of just came along slowly, but very surely. I was always interested in debates and elocutions. Even while I was in school, I was someone who would always, raise her hand. I always wanted to sort of put my point across. And I really enjoyed all the activities that allowed me to, speak. And I wasn't as good, I think, with the written work, at least in my early days at school. But I think that given an opportunity to speak, I was told and I found myself to be fairly persuasive. So it sort of became like naturally aligned as I started growing up. People would say, oh, ye to lawyer banegi, she's going to grow up to be a lawyer. And somewhere slowly that I think started taking root in my head. And as I grew up, I did end up taking sciences during my 11th and 12th grade because, as all Indian families do, everyone was like, well, you should at least take science so that, in case you change your mind, at least you'll have all your options open. And I ended up writing all my engineering entrance exams and so on and so forth, while also writing the entrance exams for law schools. But I think in the end, I decided to stick with law because I realized even while going through the process of the engineering entrance exam, that was not something that excited me. So although I came from a family where my parents, everyone, like there was no law. So my grandfather, who unfortunately I never got to meet because he passed away while my father was still very young, he was a lawyer, but we had not met him. So I think there was like some distant connection I felt with that, but like I had not had someone in my family who I had seen to be a lawyer. So it was slightly an unknown path. But in going over, my application processes, I definitely found out that I was not going to be a good engineering student. It was just not something I enjoyed. Whereas just the idea of being in law school was something that inspired me. So I think it was something that took shape gradually over the years. But by the time I came in the 11th and 12th grade, I was fairly crystal clear that I wanted to go to law school.
That's quite the beautiful journey. I have no lawyers in my family as well. So when I told my parents one bright afternoon that law is something I want to pursue, so they were taken aback. They were just like, whose DNA did you get? I don't think anyone in our family wanted to do something of that sort. But that's a beautiful journey. When it develops organically, I believe it's the best way of it developing.
Absolutely. And I think, it's important that whether you end up taking up law as a profession or anything else, as you said, it should be something that you feel should come from within, because otherwise what ends up happening, at least from the stories I've seen from a lot of people, is that when you reach a certain age, you realize, well, a lot of things that I'd been doing were to, make my parents happy, make my family happy. But this is not something that brings me joy. And I think the same thing happened where, as you said, when I told my parents that, no, I definitely want to pursue law as a career. Of course, there was some trepidation, some hesitation because, other than my grandfather, nobody else was a lawyer. And also this was a time when We did, like the law firms, obviously today there are so many avenues available to law students. When I had started, not even graduated, when I had started law school, there were relatively fewer known paths, with the most common being, and what everyone said, well, okay, you'll take an umbrella and you'll park it right in front of the high court, and then you'll notarize people's documents. That's what everyone sort of thought. But I'm very grateful that my parents supported my journey. And, after a conversation, they were like, fine, if that is what's going to make you happy, then that is the most important thing for us, that you should be happy, not just during your graduation, but subsequently in life. And you should not feel that you were pressured into taking up any career just because of, family or societal expectations.
Right. That's amazing. Supportive parents are genuinely the best. So you completed your undergrad back in 2010, almost, I'd say, a decade and a half ago. How would you say, it's a long time. I can't even imagine. I'm in my second year now. How would you say those formative 5 years of law school at NLIU impacted your personal and professional development?
I really had a good time in my 5 years. I think more important than anything else was it was the first time I was sort of, stepping out of my home. It was going to be the first time that I was going to live independently. So I think other than the professional growth, which I'll come to, I think personally being in a hostel, it taught me so many things, right? When you're in your home, you live in like a safe cocoon. You are just with your parents, your siblings, perhaps. There's a sense of familiarity. There's a sense of ownership. You're always amongst, people that you're safe and comfortable and secure with, people you've known all of your life. And I think even if you have any discord, like, yes, of course, everyone fights with, siblings and things like that. You never really have a difference of opinion when you're that young and when you're at home. So I think first stepping out into college, you understand how the rest of the world works. And that's your first taste of it. You might be in college with a lot of different people, like the spectrum of students. I remember we had people, my classmates who had come from different states of India, right? There were people who had grown up in Delhi, people who had grown up in Madhya Pradesh, people who had grown up in Lucknow, Kanpur, a lot of people who had grown up in and around Mumbai. So I think all of those students brought different perspectives. They brought their own, their ways of living and thinking. And you suddenly found yourself in a melting pot of that group. And that's where you start to form your own opinions, right? Different from what you learned at home or within your family or within your immediate community. Once you start interacting with people from different perspectives, slowly your personal, political, economic, these opinions which we didn't even know existed, slowly they begin to form. In class, when you're called upon to give answers, you realize that people draw upon their own experiences, and that's what shaped them, and your answers were shaped by how you were brought up. But once you start listening to different perspectives, you realize there's so much more out there. So I think that was extremely relevant and important, and I'm very grateful. The other thing that stands out to me is that in NLI, when I was a student, we had a small class, right? We were a group of just under 80 students, right? Which meant that we were able to forge good friendships, deep relationships with a lot of people, because it wasn't, and I say this for comparison because my friends who went to engineering schools, right, they were 1 in 800, 1 in 500, right? And so the chances that you would actually know each and every person in your batch were vanishingly small. But for me, I could say that yes, during the 5 years, and also because all of us lived on campus, we were able to, develop friendships across our own batch and across batches. So I thought that both of those things really contributed to me forming my own community, my friendships. And professionally, of course, that the 5 years taught me everything that I know about being a lawyer. From the very first year of, well, how do you read a case? How do you read, how do you understand the concept of a written case law, what it means to then, summarize it? How do you understand what is the reasoning and the rationale behind it? And then how do you develop your own arguments? How do you draw from different sources to make a compelling argument? Also, how do you understand opinions which are different from what you were going to argue? So if you ever find a case law which was, diverging from what you had initially thought it to be, how do you then differentiate facts to say, well, although this case said something different, it does not apply in my case because of A, B, and C. So I think all of those skills you slowly develop, and as a lawyer, and I think all of that for me, I would owe it to my 5 years at NLIU for sure.
You very rightly explained the journey, and currently I'm in my second year, but I'm looking forward to experience everything that you've mentioned in my next 3 years. So
I think absolutely, as you go through the years, you will realize, that it really is like building a house, like you lay brick by brick foundation, and slowly, and you build it up. And very small skills, which you probably didn't realize while you were taking that course, at the end of it, when you set the capstone, when that final brick is laid, and you look at yourself back as a lawyer, you're like, wow, I didn't know I picked up so many small things based on every course, every class, every professor. And I'm very excited for the remaining 3 years of your journey as well.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Now, if we could move to the LLM application, considering the project is about project. So it has been some time, but if you could recall or if you could share insights on how you managed the application process. Did you rely on the support of seniors or colleagues, or did you engage an external consultant to help you?
Thank you for that question. Yes, I had very, very supportive seniors, both within law school and also, colleagues that I had worked with. So by the time I wrote my LLM application, I had completed almost 2.5 years of work at, well, it was then known as Amarchand Mangaldas, and now, of course, it's split into CAM and SAM. So people I had worked with, some of my seniors from law school, people who had themselves done their LLM, they were very, very, I'm so grateful that they were so gracious in lending their time, both to talk me through the process and then in giving their time to review my SOPs, my letters of recommendation. So I think, again, the way it worked, at least when I had graduated, was typically most people would think of working for a few years and then doing their abroad to gain that, that exposure, whether it was from the US colleges or UK colleges or elsewhere. And then I think majority of us, at least when we were starting our journey, we didn't really know whether we would continue working in those countries abroad, even though it may have been somewhere on our radar. But I think the initial journey was just about how to get from where we were to get to the LLM program. And I think, again, my network of seniors and colleagues really, really helped a lot. I sort of ended up focusing primarily to the US colleges. So I spoke with colleagues like Triyamba, Anuj, others, so many of those who had done this process before me, and they were very generous with their time. So even the strategies of, which college to apply, what would be a good fit, how to go about with my SOPs, I got a lot of help from them.
That's amazing. And what factors motivated you, as you've mentioned, to pursue an LLM in the US as opposed to other countries? What were the parameters you considered while choosing specifically University of Chicago Law School, and what made it stand out from other universities?
So I think for the UK, I think there was a toss-up between UK and the US. And I think in speaking with some of the people, at least at that time, who had gone on to do their masters in UK, they said that they found it similar in some ways to law school in India, in the sense, like the way the case law was taught. And in speaking with people who did their LLM from US, I found that just, the whole Socratic method was a little bit more, it was used more in the law schools in US. And I thought that would probably be a little different from the way I had gone to school in India. So I thought maybe, that should be something that I should explore, because it was at the end of the day going to be a whole year of studying, and I wanted that experience to be a little bit different than what I had already done. Coming to choosing the University of Chicago over other law schools. So again, similar research as I'm pretty sure people do now. Actually, I'll be honest, in speaking with a lot of people who have done their LLM more recently, and speaking with students now, I realize when I look back that my research would seem so small and so narrow, because I honestly didn't know that there were so many universities, both within the United States and even in different countries, that were specialized. Because I think at the time when I was writing my applications, the number of people who had gone out to do the LLM, especially the ones that I knew from NLIU, was obviously, a smaller sample, right? Than the number of people who've done LLMs today. Just social media, internet, etc., it wasn't as burgeoning as it is today. It was still pretty nascent. So getting information, the channels of information were, I think, relatively smaller. So we ended up, most of us at the time that, I had applied, other colleagues, we ended up sticking to, the known universities. Okay, you applied to your Harvard, your UPenn, your Yale, Berkeley, and those were some of the colleges I had applied to as well. NYU, University of Chicago, when I look back at it, was actually the last university that I had applied to. And the reason for applying there was that a good friend of mine, Shashwat, he was doing his LLM at the University of Chicago at that time when I was applying. And I just reached out to him, gently for a chat to ask, how was his experience of applications. And he told me that he really enjoyed his time in U Chicago. The one thing I remember which stood out to me and that sort of swayed my decision in even applying there, let alone accepting, which came much later, he said, the class size is really small. And he said that there was just about 60 students in his class. And overall, the number of JD students was also really small. I think the University of Chicago Law School probably has about, 250 students in across the three classes of JD. So again, it's a very small law school. And the other thing he said was that you were allowed to take cross-disciplinary courses from other colleges within the University of Chicago. So during your year of LLM, you could also take classes at the Booth School or, the Harris School, so on and so forth. And I thought that was something that was very unique. I didn't know if other universities allowed that or not, but at least this was something that I had found out. So University of Chicago was school that I put in my application last. I did get selected in most places that I applied to, with the exception of Harvard. So I got admitted in Columbia, in NYU, in UPenn, U Chicago, Berkeley. But I think in the end, it came down to me choosing between Columbia and U Chicago. One major factor that swayed my decision was that I got a scholarship. I got 50% tuition waiver at the University of Chicago. And that was, a big thing, obviously, given that I was going to be spending essentially my own money, right, to do this program. And just, I think, I don't remember, I think the dollar was somewhere close to 50 rupees at that time or something. So it was a huge chunk that the tuition waiver brought me. And the other thing, like I said, which stuck to me even at the time that I had applied, was that this was a smaller class. And in my 5 years at law school at NLIU, I really appreciated being in a small class, because I thought that it gave me better opportunities to interact with the professors, with my own classmates. And I figured out that I learned better in smaller cohorts. So that sort of, that was an experience which I was sure that would probably be meaningful to me, because it would be a similar sort of teaching environment, even though the way the US law schools work, I realized were different. But I think being in smaller cohorts, I thought was something that was at least familiar. And so I ended up going to University of Chicago. And I honestly, I think when I look back at it, it was one of the best years of my both professional and personal life.
Right. But that was a brutal decision to make between Columbia and it's like several amazing options. And then University of Chicago. It's an honor to talk to you, definitely.
Oh, no, you're very kind to say that. No, it was definitely a very, very difficult decision. I remember agonizing over it so much. Again, I spoke to a lot of people, particularly one of my very close mentors and good friends who himself had gone to Columbia. And, in just weighing the options between living in New York City, but again, when you come having no previous interaction with the United States or knowledge of the US, New York obviously is, the city that everyone has heard about, right? Columbia is such a great law school. So the idea that I would be giving that up to go to lesser known university, at least at that time, or a city that, not so many people had heard about beyond the fact that it is freezing in Chicago always. So that was a very, very difficult and agonizing decision. But I think, in hindsight, I would have made that decision all over again, 100%.
So, LORs, as I've been told, are a critical part of the LLM application process. What key factors should be considered when selecting recommenders for the LLM application? How did you go about choosing yours?
So I think I narrowed it down by the subjects that I thought I was going to be studying in each of these universities that I was going to apply, right? I remember for University of Chicago, the program that I was very interested in, or at least the subjects that I was very interested in, were economic analysis of law, public choice, a lot of admin law, things like that, which were very analytical. So I had to go back and see what were the subjects that I did in NLIU, which would sort of closely resemble the track that I wanted to take, which professors taught me those courses, whether I did well in those courses or not. And then I sort of took the themes that I had written in my statement of purpose to tie in my LOR. And so, I reached out to my professors accordingly and said, if you'd be, kind enough to spare some time. And then I prepared the drafts highlighting the subjects that I had studied with those professors and how that tied in with the program or the track that I was considering for each university. So I do remember making several drafts for each of my professors based on the university where I was going to send it. Like I remember for Yale, even though now when I think back at it, I don't think I should have ever applied to Yale. I had no business applying to it. It's such an academically rigorous university. So, unless you're considering becoming like an academic, right? I mean, obviously those people will see right through your SOP. But I remember for Yale, I had asked a professor who had taught us jurisprudence and constitutional law, like very, very strongly academic courses. And, I asked him for his, for his recommendation. And I had brought out everything academic about me during my 5 years. But when I wrote to University of Chicago, I brought in a lot of the commercial subjects that I had studied and a lot of economics, those subjects. I even brought in a letter of recommendation from my my senior at work, because I tried to bring in, a little bit of that aspect of what I had learned during work. So I think you have to sort of tailor the letters of recommendation based on the universities you're applying to, based on the track you're going to pursue, and then go deeper into your subjects, which you think will tie into those themes. And I think it's always a good idea to get a mix of letters of recommendation from professors as well as colleagues or maybe your seniors at work. Obviously, I understand, a lot of people may not tell their employers when they're applying for LLM. So that's a decision that you have to make. But assuming your employer is on board and your, whoever's your senior at work, if they are able to give you a good recommendation, I think that also has a good impact.
Right. And LOR, of course, extremely important, but I believe SOP has a great weightage as well. Is there something, any information, any advice that you can give in terms of the SOP writing?
Sure. Again, I feel that a lot of, quote unquote advice that I might give today will probably feel like most people who are applying for LLM today, they already know it. They're so much better prepared than I feel I ever was. But I think SOPs should really, truly, they should reflect A, who you are, and B, what you want to do. And I think that if you look at your 5 years of law school or 3 years of law school, depending on how and where you went, and if you did have some work experience after that, you will be able to see a common theme. Maybe there were subjects that you really excelled in, or if you had optional subjects that you took, right? There may have been a theme in why you picked certain electives over the others. When you started working, maybe there's a certain kind of work that you ended up doing. And even outside of that, right, people have so many extracurricular activities that they continue even outside of college after that as well. So look into all of those things and see what patterns emerge, right? And you should really have a genuine reason for going. I mean, of course, experiencing law school abroad and adding that to your resume, that's the foundational reason. But I think having a deeper story or a deeper meaning as to why you're choosing a particular law school really resonates with admission committees. Recently, I spoke with some people who had done their LLMs in the last few years, more in like the 2015 to now time, the last 7, 8 years. And I realized how much more specialized people have become in their research. So I met someone who did their LLM because they wanted to absolutely focus on arbitration law, right? So the colleges that they chose were ones that had tremendous programs in international arbitration, right? So for them, choosing colleges was less about the brand and more about the subjects that they were going to study, because they wanted a faculty that would be dedicated and devoted extremely to, that subject matter. And in doing so, I realized that they sort of surrounded themselves with a cohort of everyone who had a similar outlook. Everyone in that cohort, eventually had actually been doing international arbitration and wanted to continue their career in that. So if there is a particular subject that you're passionate about, if there is a particular career that you really want to take forward, like, I don't know, international human rights or international arbitration, banking and finance, I think bring that out in your SOP and choose your colleges which will further that career path. General LLMs are great, especially if, your intention is to spend that 1 year in a country abroad and just understand that judicial system, build a network and take it back. But if you're looking to further your academic prowess in certain subjects, then, make sure that you've done that research as well. So I think SOPs should be crafted such that when the admissions committee is looking at it, they should feel that you do belong to that cohort. So if you end up submitting a very generic LLM to a program which is very, very focused, and if there is no connection between what you have done in your past, in your career with that specific subject, chances are that, the admission committee may not find you to be a good fit. On the other hand, if your SOP is very, very specific, like if you're absolutely sure that all you want to do is, commercial laws, corporate laws, right? And you apply to, let's say, just as an example, as we were discussing, to a university like Yale, once again, it may not be, I'm not saying it won't be, but it may probably not be a good fit, because Yale, again, is known to be a very, academic institution. They're looking for people who will eventually move on to be academics, scholars, professors, someone who's deeply committed in that sense. So I think finding a good fit and weaving your story in such a way that you are someone who belongs to that cohort and that part shines through is extremely important.
Right. And you have mentioned that your reason for choosing US colleges over the UK one was because they use the Socratic method of teaching, which was obviously very different from the system and the way that we're taught in India. So could you expand on that? And additionally, you said that you had chosen University of Chicago Law because of the variety of courses that you were provided there. How should students go about, choosing these courses and understanding what would suit them best? What factors did you consider while building your own curriculum?
Right. So I think for me, when I had to choose my courses, one thing that was, very, very good when I came to the University of Chicago, and I'm pretty sure it's the same in most law schools across the US, There is a time when you get to pick your courses at the start of the semester. You, of course, have to sign up for most courses. And sometimes if you're not quick enough, seats might get filled. There are certain subjects which are mandatory, which of course everyone has to do, typically like the 1L classes. But after that, everything ends up becoming elective. People chose a lot of different courses based on professors. I remember in my class, there were people who were like, well, regardless of whatever Professor Stone teaches, we will take his class because, he's such an iconic professor. He teaches constitutional law, primarily the First Amendment and freedom of speech. So very coincidentally, in the year that I studied, that is not what he taught. He taught a different subject within constitutional law, but we all took his class again, and everyone was sure that no matter what he teaches, we will take it. So sometimes it's the professor. Sometimes it is the specific subject. So again, for a lot of us who came to the University of Chicago, economic analysis of law or the economic understanding of law was a subject that we knew that as a subject, we really, really wanted to take that, regardless of who would have taught it or in what form. The other thing that I mentioned was, as I said, there's always a period where it's called the ad drop period. So you could sort of audit these classes, like you could attend the first lecture. And if at the end of that you realize, well, this is probably not a good fit. I either don't enjoy this subject or, with this professor, I'm not able to understand what they teach. You could drop that subject. So that there's a week or 2 weeks in which you can add subjects, remove them. It also helps you build your curriculum and your schedule, because sometimes there may be 2 subjects that are at the same time and you may want both of them. So it's a good way to sort of audit it. 1 week you attend one class, the other week you attend one class, and then you realize, well, I think maybe I like this one over that one. And I think that was something that, again, it was not something that we had in India while we were studying, right? Because these are all the courses you have to take. These are all the professors. So that opportunity to audit classes and to see which one I wanted to take and did not maybe find a fit, I think that really, really helped me. And that's how I built my curriculum. It's, again, as most of those who finish their LLM might know, it's a very short course, right? It's 9 months of academic study, really. So we don't get a lot of time. So you have to obviously make those decisions very quickly. But I liked the opportunity to be able to select my courses. And that's what I did. I had certain courses that I knew right from the get-go that I really, really wanted. Like public choice was one, economic analysis of law was the other, antitrust law, which was taught at that time by Professor Randy Picker, was again something that I really was very interested in. So I made sure that when I chose my subjects, it was a healthy mix of the subjects that I wanted to study, as well as some of the professors that I really, really, admired and wanted to be in their class.
Right. Wonderful.
And in speaking about the Socratic method, yes, I thought that was, very, very different from the way that I studied at NLIU, because I think the idea that you should, be prepared at all times with pretty much any subject matter that was given to you. And I think that fear of, oh, well, you could get called upon at any point of time, it forced you, or at least it forced me to pay attention, throughout the class, right? And it also forced me to be prepared when I came to class with my own opinions and answers, right? So it wasn't like when you're asked questions in the Socratic method, it's not simply that, well, you give the summary of whatever case law you may have read, because at the end of that question would always be something like, and what do you think about it? Or what's your opinion? Do you think that, the judge was right or wrong? So it wasn't just about reading the cases or the summaries. I actually had to think critically about it, because I knew that if I got called upon, I would have to give what my thoughts about, that particular situation was. And sometimes the Socratic method would bring you questions like, okay, so as you just heard your colleague, they said this, this, and this. How would you counter that? Or are you in agreement with it, right? If you had to argue it the other way, how would you do it? So throughout the class, you have to be sure that you are listening to every point of view that the rest of your colleagues are giving, right? Now, you have to listen to their perspectives. A lot of times, while listening to them, your own opinion could get shaped or modified, and you'd be like, aha, well, I didn't think of that bit at all. Like, it was always so amazing to me how my colleagues, how they thought about everything in a certain way. A lot of it obviously had to do with the fact that, many of them had sort of, for us, like we were foreign students, right? And we studied with a lot of JD students. So they had a different understanding of the law. They also had a lot of cultural understanding of certain laws, right? Which we didn't. And so answers sometimes would bring like an outsider's perspective. And I think they appreciated that because they were obviously rooted in studying for these courses and these subjects with a cultural mindset, right? And when we talked about it from an outsider's perspective, I thought that was always a very healthy discussion. For us, it was great and engaging because we would then understand why this is historically significant, why this judgment was written in a particular way, like why did the Burger Court lean in a particular way, or why, now the Roberts Court is of a certain ideology. So I really think that, the Socratic method brought in a lot of self-study in me, which I didn't have it to that extent, at least when I was studying in NLIU. And yeah, it brought in me the habit of studying in the library a lot more than I did earlier, because you really wanted to be prepared for those questions if they had come your way.
That totally makes sense. In fact, the audit method of classes that you were talking about, that's very interesting. It's you're given a chance to choose what you want, and then you can pick and choose amongst those. So that's a brilliant way of having a practical understanding. It also builds responsibility on yourself, and you can
Yes.
take accountability of this is what I chose, so I have to go through with it.
Absolutely, absolutely. Rather than saying at the end, well, this is what was given to me and I didn't really like the subject. I think the idea that you are responsible, as you rightly said, for your courses, for building out what are the experiences you want out of law school, what are the courses you want to study. And I think that really makes a lot of difference for sure.
And you cannot zone out in classes, which is something that happens quite a lot over here. I understand. It's a very interesting way of teaching and understanding as well. So you were awarded the Dean's Certificate of Recognition for completing the pro bono pledge during your LLM. Could you share more about this achievement? What kind of pro bono work did it involve and what significance it held for you?
So in the year when I was at law school, the New York bar they changed their rule and they require 50 hours of pro bono work in addition to, writing and passing the bar examination. So at the time when you had to get admission in New York State Bar, you also had to show that you had completed 50 hours of pro bono. I think that was the thing that accelerated hours of pro bono work. So off and on, a lot of my classmates and I had been dabbling in some pro bono work. And the reason we started initially was just because it gave us an opportunity to spend some time outside of like the university curriculum to understand how the laws practically worked in the US, right? Given that most of my colleagues during the LLM came from different judicial systems, most of us had practiced law in our home countries, but we had not had the opportunity to practice it in the United States or, see it being practiced generally. So the pro bono clinics gave us that opportunity to just see how in practical life these cases were done. So in Illinois, which is where Chicago is, they have these 7-Eleven clinics, I think, which are bar students or law students who help admitted attorneys with some of their cases, which the attorneys take pro bono. So we assisted. We were not, I think we could not be those 7-Eleven attorneys, of course, because we were not really on the way to be licensed in Illinois, but we could attend those pro bono clinics, which a lot of us did. But once this New York State Bar requirement came in, then we really had to accelerate our hours because we needed those 50 hours. But I think that was, a healthy sort of race that got into everyone. We were like, well, I'm going to finish it faster. I'm going to finish it faster. And I'm so glad that we ended up taking those opportunities. I volunteered at an elder law clinic and an immigration clinic in Chicago. And I remember every Sunday I used to take the bus to downtown Chicago, where the elder law clinic was held, and volunteered there for 4 hours. I did mostly, like intake work, where when these people who needed assistance from pro bono attorneys, they would come in. So I would see their documents, take down their name, information, do an initial vetting of whether this was a case that the attorneys could actually take, or was this something that, the people who came for assistance could do pro se on their own. So that was important because, as you might know, for a lot of these pro bono clinics, the resources are relatively small, right? Not a lot of attorneys are able to devote their time for pro bono activities. So, and the number of people who need the assistance is obviously a lot. So, just doing that initial intake really helped us to allocate our resources. And for cases where we thought that, this work could be done by the people themselves, we would assist them, like, even just filling out simple forms for their social security benefits and things like that. An offshoot was also the immigration law clinic, where again, it was people who would come in for their nationalizations, and they needed help and assistance. And that's where we would do the intake to see whether they needed an attorney or whether this was something that they could potentially do on their own. So those were the two clinics that I assisted in. That's how, I ended up getting the Dean certificate, which was very, very gratifying. So the idea that I was able to help practically, and give back to the community was very, very gratifying.
Right. And considering, like you have mentioned, with only 11 months to spend in the city, what were the biggest challenges you faced, both academically and personally? And what practical tips would you give to students who are thinking of pursuing an LLM in an abroad city?
Sure. Reach out to people who have gone to that law school before you if you know anyone. I think that would be something that I would do, because a lot of small things like, housing and transport. I mean, for us, it's, at least for me, it was, the first time I was going to be moving outside of my home country, outside of India, right, to live for a considerable period of time. So a lot of things that we take for granted in India or at home, you realize once you come here that those things are not there, whether it is simple things like, groceries. How do you get from point A to point B? You don't have a car at your disposal. Public transport may not be always available. Your university, depending on where you go, sometimes it could be further away from where you live. Campus housing may or may not be always available. So if you're able to speak with someone who has done their LLM in the university where you're considering or where you're going, talk to them, take them out for coffee, say, hey, please, can I take down, any and all information that you may have? Do that a little bit ahead of time. The other thing, if you're able to, and I know that it may not be possible for everyone, but if you're able to, try and go a little bit earlier if you're able to go. So when you have your F1 status, you're allowed to come into the country 30 days before your course begins. If you're able to go a month in advance, do that and just get acclimatized to the city, even if it is just to take the bus from here to there, or just, go around the city. I think that helps. It also helps you just to feel a little bit more at home. If whether depending on whether you're going to live on campus or off campus, that's a big decision. A lot of people who went to the University of Chicago with me for their LLM, they had come with significantly more work experience than me. So for them, that year, in addition to studying, was also important to network, because for a lot of them who were going to go back to their home country to practice, they needed to make sure that they had built, a good network of attorneys in Chicago. So for many of them, living in downtown Chicago was, more advantageous. So that's also something that I would recommend, think beforehand as to what your purpose is going to be in that year. If it's going to be a year of academic study, like, if that's your goal for that year, that you're going to study, take as many courses, spend a lot of time in the library, then you probably need to be as close to campus as possible. If you are going there as maybe someone who is more senior, who's, mid-level in their career, probably on their way to make partner, because now I know a lot of people have started doing their LLMs much later in their career. Recently, I came across someone who was a partner at, a law firm in India, and who had come here. Again, for them, their expectations for the LLM were going to be very different, because they were here to network and make more clients in New York as they were trying to, expand their practices. Right. So I think having clarity of your goals, what do you want out of your 9 months or, the 12 months that you're going to stay here, that's extremely important. For me, when I look back at it, I think I was I wasn't that clear. If I could do it all over again, I think I would tell my younger self that I should be more clear about what I wanted out of the experience. I was sort of, like just going with the flow. But I think a lot of my colleagues, including one who, again, I consider a good friend now, he was a partner at a law firm in India at the time. So he had come with, very specific goals. And I wish that, I was a little bit more clear. As much fun as I had, obviously, I think if I had spent a little bit more time planning, maybe I would have got something more at the time, just because, as you said, it's a very short time. But yeah, definitely research before you come in. Oh, and one thing, and it may or may not be important, but I think know the climates that you're going to face throughout the year. When I came to Chicago, I had come having never seen snow in my life, right? It was the first time that I had stepped out of India and to live abroad. And I had no idea how chilly it could get. And I moved here in September, and by November, it was so cold that my eyelashes would freeze the moment I would step out. Like, it was that cold, right? So that was definitely a huge, I had no idea how much that was going to impact me. The sun sets really, really early during winter months. And I think I definitely got impacted by seasonal affectation disorder for like a couple of months, because I think in December, it used to get like by 3:30, 4 o'clock, it would be sundown and it would get pitch dark by 5 p.m. And I didn't know what to do after that. Like, my brain was just wired to go to sleep, but I still had the rest of the day because there were classes, there were other things to do. So that certainly took a toll on me.
That makes sense. And I think that's quite a lot of practical advice to keep in mind. But ma'am, I'd just like to remind you that you were still very young. You were just figuring out things. And it's not enough time, especially considering that the resources that we have today, it was something that you guys didn't. So I'd say, according to me, while understanding your journey, you did brilliantly in my
Oh, thank you. You're super kind to say that.
Of course. So, for a foreign trained lawyer to practice law in the US, passing the bar exam for the respective state is very crucial. So,
Right.
what should foreign trained lawyers know about eligibility, preparation of the favorable states for taking this bar exam? How can they effectively prepare for the same?
Right. So I think a lot of people would probably already know when they come. Like, New York and California are definitely very favorable states. They have a lot of foreign trained attorneys who are admitted to the bar. The problem really, I think, is since COVID, I think the systems have become a little slow. So earlier, when I had applied, we would have to send in our documents to the New York State Bar. There was, I think, 1st of October or 1st of November was when that date would open, when you could send in your applications. And in about 3 months or so, they would send in your eligibility, right? So they would go through your courses and they would let you know that, yes, you're eligible to sit for the bar exam so long as you take certain prerequisite courses. And, again, most of that information is already available even today at New York State Bar's website, California State Bar's website. I think over the years, I have also found out that there are other states like Texas and Connecticut, which also allow foreign trained attorneys to write the bar exam. Again, there are certain nuances there. You have to show certain documents and, you have to show what courses you have completed. But I think the good part is, for most of these states, there will always be someone that you can write to. How quickly we'll get the answers may vary. Some states are better than the others. So I would say that if you have plans of writing if you have the plans of taking the bar as a foreign trained attorney, do that research even while you're in India, right? Because you can reach out to these administrators. Everything is over email these days. You can let them know the courses that you've already taken. You can let them know which law school you are planning to be in, if by then you've already got your admission offer. So that way, when you go, you are prepared, because most of these places would have you take some compulsory subjects, because that's what, you'll have to have at least one course in American legal history, in American writing, so on and so forth. And that's actually a big decision to make, because some people may not want to, quote unquote, waste their credits on these courses if they do not want to write the bar exam. So know well in advance whether you want to write the bar exam or not. For a lot of people, particularly those who either want to come back to India and practice, or who may want to practice in niche areas like, international arbitration, a bar license in United States probably doesn't really help you. So instead of taking those 4 or 5 courses, you might, which are required for the bar license, you may, study something else. So definitely discuss this beforehand. Think about whether you want to write the bar exam or not. If you do, then make sure that you've taken those courses as soon as you start law school here, if they are offered in the first semester, so that by the time you are putting in your eligibility request, you can already show that you have completed those courses. And after that, preparation for the bar exam. Again, I think there are so many stories. Everyone could tell their personal journey. I think I was a little underprepared when I look back at it in hindsight, because I didn't know until the second semester, I didn't have a grasp on the IRAC method of writing the answers here, right? Which is issue spotting, rule, conclusion, application. Again, this was not something that we did a lot in India, at least when I was studying. Hopefully that has changed. And, a lot of answers have now started modeling the US way of writing answers. But making outlines, writing answers in a particular way, that took me a lot of time. So I think a lot of my bar study prep was really just understanding how to write the answer. So even if I knew the answer, especially for the essays, it took me a long time to just, formulate the answers in the way that I knew that the examiners wanted it. The other thing is, and those who study law in the US, those who, undergo the JD program, I think over the 3 years of their study, as opposed to 1 year of study, they really take a lot more tests than we do. Right. And I think that also teaches them, or better prepares them, I think. So it's something that we have to speed up in that 1 year. So if you are going to take the bar exam, I would really recommend that start taking the test preps as early as you can, because I think a lot of us thought, oh, well, once I have completed my course, that's when I will know everything and I'll start studying for the bar. Believe me when I say it, so many subjects that you study in law school have nothing to do with the bar. Like the bar has, 6 or 7 subjects. There are these textbook questions. You just have to learn them up and you have to give the answers. Stuff like property law, family law. There are so many people who've never really studied property law other than for the bar exam, or family law other than for the bar exam. So don't wait. If you know someone who had written the exams previously, see if you can get the books early and just get into the habit of doing the the practice tests. The other advice I would give is, which again, I learned, very, very late, was that the bar exam it's a long exam to write. Like when I wrote the bar exam, it was 7 hours each day, right? 4 hours in the morning, 3 hours in the afternoon, then 3 hours in the morning, 4 hours in the afternoon. Just sitting for 4 hours in one place and just writing the exam, that requires a lot of patience and practice. So while I was concentrating a lot on studying, just learning up the subjects, I didn't really sit for 4 hours in one place until, like the last month of towards the end of July, very close to my exam. And that's when I realized that, oh my God, just sitting for 4 hours itself requires so much practice. Unfortunately, it's all now, it's come and gone. But I wish that I had learned, just the skill of sitting for 4 hours, concentrating and writing the exam, because my mind would wander off. Like at the end of an hour, I would just be daydreaming. And then I had to snap myself out of it and be like, oh my God, I still have so many answers to write and so many questions to do. So I think that's also something that's important.
4 hours, that sounds like a really, really long period to sit down and work on. I think that is, it's very important to practice sitting down and focusing for that period of time. So you've lived in various cities like Washington, D.C., New Jersey, New York, and worked at several prestigious firms such as Criterion Economics, Fragomen, and Chugg. reaching a very remarkable milestone as a partner in your legal career. Could you share your reflections on the common challenges that is faced by recent graduates in the job employment market in the US? And what advice would you offer them to navigate the employment market?
I think first let me acknowledge that's very generous of you. When I look back at it, it doesn't, I don't think it seems as big, but I think, yeah, in retrospect, it does, I can see how completing almost 10 years in the US has now become a journey. So thank you very much for recognizing that. I appreciate it. I think I was very fortunate in many ways. Let me also preface by saying that when I did my LLM, I was not looking to stay here. I was not looking to work here. And my plan was certainly to just, go back to it, probably to the firm that I was earlier working for, maybe even go back to my boss and tell him, please, can you take me? And so everything that's happened, in the last 11, 12 years has honestly been, it wasn't something that I had planned out. It just so happened serendipitously that when I moved to do my husband also moved to the US with his company. At the end of my 1 year of LLM, we get 1 year of what is known as an OPT, optional practical training. On F1, you're allowed to work for 1 year. And at that time, my husband had moved to Montreal. So 1 year while I was in Chicago, he was in New York. And then he moved to Montreal in Canada. So I said, all right, while he's there, I will pick up something for this 1 year. And very fortunately, I was connected with Mr. Greg Seidek, who owns Criterion Economics. And, he offered me this job in Washington, D.C., which was amazing because I got to live for a whole year in a fantastic city right out of law school. It was the first time that I was earning in the US. Again, that at that time felt like such a milestone. But I didn't put in a lot of effort, I think, which I should have in retrospect, in networking, because I just thought of it as a 1 year gig. I thought that at the end of this 1 year, once my husband is done with his work in Montreal, we would move back to India. It was only at the end of my time in Criterion in June of 2015 that, it seemed like we found out that my husband will be transferred back to US for good. And that's actually when I was like, oh my God, so now I actually have to, find a job in the US. Like, we are going to stay here. Of course, even at that time, we didn't know that we were going to stay here for a long time or not. But, for the near future, at least we had to be here. And that's when I started reaching out to different networks, to look for a job. And I do think that this mattered because had I known during my year of LLM or even during my year in DC that I was going to be in the US for good, I would have probably spent more time, networking, finding the right job opportunities, or even while at law school, I would have tried to find, a job, whether in Chicago itself or like with a law firm. I was just taking it as, like that 1 year of sort of freedom. And like, okay, let's, get this, enjoy this 1 year. So as much as I thoroughly enjoyed my year in DC, and I wouldn't have it any other way, I didn't really have a plan at the end of it, right? So when I came to New York, I really had to, I don't know. I'm sure this resonates with pretty much everyone. I sent emails out to any and everyone. I would just go on, LinkedIn. I think LinkedIn had just come in at that time, or it was in very nascent stages. Any sort of entry which would say India, LLM, New York, I would just reach out to those people and say, please, can I speak with you? This is my resume. I'm looking for a job. And in one very fortunate accident, I sent out my email, my resume and my job application to my now boss, Mishtia Matthews, because of, again, the LLM algorithm. When I did the, LinkedIn search, she had done an LLM. She had worked in Amarchand before doing her LLM. And she was at that time a partner at Chug, where I am now. And as it turned out, I asked her many months and many years later, one of the attorneys at our office had just given notice. So she was desperately looking for an attorney and I was looking for a job. So I think, it became like a match made in heaven. And I went out to meet her and I interviewed. And I remember when I went there, I'd gone with a cast in my hand because I'd broken my hand like literally 2 days before I went to the interview. And I was just like, oh my God, I hope this is not a reason for them to not give me a job. I was like, I'll type with my other hand. Don't worry about it. But, I really wanted the job. So, that's how I got my start too. And I could not be more fortunate. I think, Dia has been an amazing boss, amazing mentor. But I think there were a fair share of disappointments before I landed Chub, right? Because I had sent out applications everywhere and didn't really hear back. But now when I look back at it, I understand why I didn't hear back, because these were all people who had never heard of me, right? I was sending out cold emails. So although there is some, value to sending out cold emails, because I didn't even know the when I wrote to her, it just so happened that, they needed an attorney and I needed a job. But I think I would probably tell people to do that networking earlier enough, right? So that by the time you apply for your job, your employers or your potential employers have at least heard of you. They have spoken to you once. They have a few references. Maybe someone can put in a word for you. Because think about it, even in India or anywhere else, if you were to, hire someone for a job, you would look in at the talent pool from people that you know, right? So I think that's probably why I think that networking is so important, which again, I did not do for whatever reason. And I very strongly tell people to do that now. And I think today, students who come to do their LLM, they're so savvy. They know well in advance who to reach out to. Projects such as the Project LLM did not exist at my time. So I think kudos to all of you for putting this together, for thinking so well in advance. So I think you're all doing a great job, and just, keep up with that networking. Reach out to any and every avenue. It's not just law. There are so many different pathways. And I know that you've probably spoken to Summer and other people who are doing something, so different. Those avenues are available. So it's a matter of just, researching and networking and speaking with people. And you never know where that first break will come from. So yeah, that's been my journey. And I hope that everyone else also finds their journey. Just remember that everyone has setbacks, but it's always a matter of finding that first break. And from there on, as long as you are a hard worker, you will succeed.
Right. And navigating the transition from an F1 visa to an H1B visa is a critical step for a lot of international students. Could you provide, particularly for our listeners who are planning to enter the US on an F1 visa, and what's the typical journey that looks like to convert it from an F1 to an H1B? I personally don't have much knowledge about this too, so very interested to learn about it.
Right. So at the end of your F1, and when you do your 1 year of LLM, you get, as I said, 1 year of OPT, which is an employment opportunity where you don't require anyone to sponsor you. You can work for any employer as long as, it is within your area of studies. So use that 1 year to, work for employers who might sponsor you eventually, because remember that you get only one shot, unlike the STEM programs, which allow for 3 years of OPT. The LLM program, which is a non-STEM field, only allows for 1 year of OPT. So you need to make sure that students who eventually want to study here and work here on H1B, they should use that 1 year to work for employers who might sponsor them on H1B. But if for any reason they don't get picked in the lottery and they are not able to transition to H1B, try and work for employers who have offices abroad, because there are other pathways also of coming back to the US. There are different visas, including the L1 visa, where if you have worked for a company abroad for a period of 1 year in a specialized knowledge position, you can come back as an intra-company transfer. So, hypothetically, if you were working at a Skadden or a Kirkland, and if you were not picked up in the lottery this year, speak to your HR and your manager to see if you could maybe work at the London office for 1 year or in Singapore office for 18 months. And at the end of that period, you would qualify to come back most likely on an L1 visa. Have these conversations early with your employer so that, they are prepared and you are prepared in case you have to sort of switch gears. I know a lot of students these days, again, have done a lot of their research before they come in, so they know their target employers. But I would also say that outside of law firms, there are a lot of nonprofits that you could probably target, because in addition to the CAP H1B, there is also the CAP exempt H1B, which can be filed by certain employers. So they could file that cap exempt H-1B for you, even if you did not get picked in the lottery. Again, it's a matter of researching, because institutions of higher learning and nonprofits that are affiliated with institutions of higher learning and other similar organizations, research organizations, they can file this cap exempt H-1B for you. Speak with an immigration attorney if you want, once you're done with your F1. So make sure that you know all of your options so you can advocate for yourself. A lot of times employers, just because the total number of foreign trained attorneys is relatively less when compared with, US attorneys, they may not know these options. Unlike the IT industry where all employers know everything about H-1B, law firms may not know enough about it. So because it's our job, it's us who need to stay here, we need to advocate for ourselves. So learn about that so you can tell your employers if they don't know about it, and let them know that you are open to relocation. You will go to other offices. You're fine with that. And yeah.
All right. You're currently serving as the president-elect of the South Asian Bar Association of the New Jersey chapter. Congratulations on that. Could you explain what SABA is and its mission? Additionally, how did you start your journey with them in 2018?
Sure. So the South Asian Bar Association, the New Jersey chapter, is a nonprofit organization. It's an association of attorneys, and its mission is to further the cause of South Asian attorneys. We have the SABA national, and then different states have different chapters. So the idea, again, is to foster relationships between South Asian attorneys and attorneys of color, because at the moment, the South Asian attorneys are still in the minority. So we would, like at some point, such that this affinity bar is no longer a minority affinity bar. But until then, that's our primary motive. So we do a lot of programming that is for the benefit of attorneys of South Asian descent. We try and advocate for attorneys of South Asian descent who eventually, ascend to the bar. We're always in support of them. It's also an organization that supports students of South Asian descent who are currently in law schools, just again, providing them with opportunities and avenues to connect them with attorneys who are already working, providing mentor-mentee relationships. So like any other affinity bar, its main purpose and its main cause is to further, anything that provides advantages to attorneys of South Asian descent to continue working and making the workplace look, more equal. Yeah.
Wow, that's brilliant. So what type of events does SABA typically organize, and who's eligible to become a member? Also, I wanted to ask, you had mentioned about the benefits that is given and the guidance that is given to aspiring students, the South Asian students. Are there any opportunities of mentorship or scholarships, etc., that you get if you become part of this association?
Absolutely. I'm glad that you asked about that. So my journey with SABA in New Jersey started in 2018. One of my colleagues at that time, who is currently the president, Ms. Prema Radham, she at that time was a part of SABA New Jersey, the executive board. She was the VP that year. And, she encouraged me. She was also a colleague of mine at LLB. She encouraged me to, start attending the meetings, and then eventually encouraged me to run, become a member of the executive board, which I did. So I was earlier the treasurer and a secretary in 1 year. So I think I really found my calling because I think SABA, New Jersey, and other chapters as well, they really are platforms that allow South Asian attorneys of South Asian descent to sort of, network with other people. So I think when you look across and you see a partner who's of South Asian descent, I think it encourages you because you see someone who looks like you in a powerful position, and it lets you know that this is something you can aspire to, you can become that. It also provides you with an opportunity and avenues to actually meet with them and, maybe on a more personal note rather than going through formal channels to see how they made it through. As a person of color, as a woman, as someone of South Asian descent, particularly as an immigrant, right? You see that there are always systemic challenges. And a large reason of me being where I am is because of the support system I had, whether it was, my earliest employers, my colleagues who championed for me. They uplift you because they bring you along on this journey. They open up paths for you. They open up doors for you. So I felt that I needed to do the same thing for the people who came behind me. And I think South Asian Bar Association is a wonderful organization to be able to give back. And, like I said, with the encouragement of my colleagues, I ran in 2018 and 2019. After that, I took a couple of years of break once I had my children who were very young. They still are, but now I feel like I'm able to, give back again to the organization. So the president-elect this year, I'm very proud to serve with Ms. Prema Radham, who's the president this year and who sort of, initiated my journey into getting into SABA, New Jersey. The events that we plan are, again, they're varied, and all of them are done with the sole focus of bettering the causes of attorneys of South Asian descent, right? So we have our flagship gala, which this year it's coming up on October 24th. We invite dignitaries from across the spectrum, attorneys, politicians, public servants, and we raise, it's our fundraiser, and this is where we connect people, and it's a huge networking opportunity. Then we also do smaller events throughout the year. For example, in July, we did a judges reception where we invited judges of South Asian descent, and then we had students who are both currently in law schools as well as practicing attorneys, and they were able to interact with the judges. Once again, it gives them an opportunity to speak these judges, in on a more one-on-one or on a smaller, personal, intimate scale, to understand their journey and also to understand how any of these potential attorneys who may at some point want to run for judgeship or students, give them access to these judges. I think those are important events. We also have a mentor-mentee program, and we have our event coming up next week, I think, which is where we connect mentors of, attorneys who are of South Asian descent as mentors, connect them with mentees. And these could be both students as well as practicing attorneys who have, just started out their career. There are other events where there are more informal networking, events. We recently had a corporate council event where we got speakers who are corporate counsels, in-house counsels, who spoke with our audience. That was another way of the attorneys to learn how, if they wish to transition to becoming in-house counsels, what are the pathways. Earlier in the year, I spearheaded LLM Pathways program where I invited those who had done their LLM here. So, all foreign trained attorneys, and they had moved in to become attorneys in the United States and share their journey. Summer was one of the speakers there, and it was fabulous to learn of journeys of other people as well in the tri-state area. So these are the kind of events that we plan throughout the year. Students can become members of SABA New Jersey at no cost. It's free for students. We ask them to then continue to volunteer with the organization as much as they are able to. And once they, pass the bar and they become attorneys, to try and give back if they are able to in any form whatsoever. There are also scholarship opportunities. We have the bar stipend where the law students are asked and they're required to write certain essays, and they are judged on that. And then SABA New Jersey provides them with, a small bar stipend to cover some costs of their academic year. So yeah, we have a lot of those opportunities available as well.
Wow, ma'am, that's very, very thoughtful and considerate of this entire organization and you to do this much for students. I think the other day only I was talking to my friends, and the fear that we have obviously in going to a foreign country, shifting our lives completely, and understanding that organizations like this exist who will be able to hold our hands and help us through the process. I'm quite at peace knowing about things like this.
There are so many organizations, just like SABA New Jersey. Like I said, there's the national chapter as well, and so many other bar fraternity groups as well. And so I think that, all the students who wish to study their LLM, who plan to come there, come with that open mind. Of course, there will be challenges, but as you said, knowing that there are others who have gone through this journey and they are available as resources, hopefully should alleviate some of those concerns and fears. So, just embrace those challenges as they come, but know that there are people who've gone through and, reach out for help.
Right. And as we reach the end of our podcast, pursuing the LLM in the US comes with a significant financial challenge, often serving as a deterrent for several prospective students. In your view, do the long term benefits of obtaining a US outweigh these costs? And what strategies can students adopt to overcome the financial barriers?
Right. I think this would be a very, personal question to each person, because the cost it's not just the monetary cost, right? The costs involve, as you said, uprooting yourself from your familiar surroundings, your home, your family, a secure job. Most people, are already working when they plan to pursue their LM. So it's not just the money that you will be spending, it's also giving up these things. And sometimes there may be, circumstances that might be beyond your control, such that if you decided to do the LLM after that, maybe you didn't get the kind of job that you wanted. So I think that when making the decision of whether or not to do the LLM, finances, of course, need to play a huge role in it, but you also need to take into account the circumstances which could change, which could be beyond your control. So you should have backup as to what will I do if I do not get the job that I want in the US? Will I still be able to pay back my loans? If you are able to do that comfortably, then I think go ahead. Because if at the end of all of it, you come back saddled with a huge unsurmountable debt, it may not be an experience worth it, right? A lot of people try to mitigate this by studying, by going for their LLMs now, many years after their initial law school. So they probably have worked for 7, 8, 10 years. Initially, I remember when I had applied, the average age of students would be 3 or 4 years out of law school, and they would go and they would do the LLM. Now I've seen people who work 7, 8, 10 years before coming to do their LLM. It also helps because I think they have a clearer focus as to why they want to do their LLM, as opposed to, when you just come out maybe 2 or 3 years after that. Apply to as many scholarships as you are able to. There are also loans that you could take in the United States itself. There are obviously, you'd have to consider different factors, and there would also be certain conditions you'd have to meet, but that could be one opportunity. Maybe your family and friends can support you with, with financially. Right to the universities. Sometimes you'd be surprised that if the universities really want you, they would be willing to give you tuition waivers in and above, over and above any scholarship that you may have got. So reach out to any and every avenue that you may potentially, you could potentially use to lower down that debt. But also remember that getting a job in the US should not be your only plan to pay back that debt. There has to be a secondary fallback, right? Maybe it is having a job lined up already in India, so that if things don't work out here, that you're still able to go back home and pay down the debt. It shouldn't be so unsurmountable that you just cannot come out of it, because then you will neither be able to enjoy your year in the US during LLM, and even when you go back, you will come home with significant liabilities.
So, what I gather from the advice that you have given, it's very important to plan, and know what you want to do.
Absolutely.
When you go to the US. Understandable. So, you have made an incredible journey from studying in Madhya Pradesh to becoming a successful South Asian woman lawyer in the US. What message would you like to share with young women who are entering the legal profession, particularly in the light of the challenges and opportunities within the Indian legal market?
Thank you for the question. I think, and I know that this is very easy in hindsight for me to say that, you should have clarity of purpose. And I do think that students who are studying today definitely are so much more well informed than we were. But I think overall, entering the profession, whether or not you want to do your LLM, whether or not you want to move abroad, entering the profession with the understanding that there are challenges to being, a woman attorney. There are challenges to being an immigrant attorney, assuming you wish to, move out of India. There would be challenges to being a person of color anywhere outside of India. But that alone should not stop you from dreaming big. There are so many people before me who have been trailblazers, who have, lit this path before me. that I feel very confident that especially women attorneys who come after me will have paths lit up for them. And if not, that they should know all of us are here cheering for them. I think that when you reach out to the community of lawyers today, you will see that people are really, everyone is cheering on for the next generation, because we know how hard it was for many of us who were first generation lawyers, who did not come from a family of lawyers, did not have a standing practice before us to go to. We know how hard it is to make your mark. But I know that equally as many people are now giving back to those students and to those communities, right? Whether by having mentorship sessions, or even just speaking with people one-on-one to reach out to those attorneys, whether it is in India or abroad, and know that the challenges are only as big as we make them out to be, and that the willpower obviously is much stronger than those challenges. And once you set your sight to a goal, that you will find a way one way or another.
Wow. Thank you so much, ma'am. That's wonderful advice. And that brings us to the end of this episode of Brief Encounters. I would like to extend a heartfelt thank you to you for sharing such valuable insights and putting me at ease. And I'm sure the listeners would also be put at a very comfortable place after listening to all of your advice. It's been an absolute pleasure having you on the show.
Thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed talking to you. And like I said, suddenly makes me feel a million years old. But I'm so glad that I was able to share this journey with you. And hopefully it's of help to, students out there. If there's anything else I can do, feel free to reach out to me.
100%. Ma'am, the amount of success you have gained at a very incredibly young age, it's amazing. It's something that people have taken decades to achieve. So
you're very kind to say that. Thank you very much.
It was genuinely an honor to interview you.
Thank you.
To our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in. We hope you found today's discussion as enlightening as I did. And if you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow and leave us a comment. Thank you so much.